Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Keith Winton. I'm one of the volunteer organizers here. And for this session, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Cody Nielsen. He's founder and executive director of Convergent Strategies and the director of the Center for Spirituality and Social Justice at Dickinson College. In this discussion, we'll seek to invite us all to think about the next stage of the interfaith movement, one that should include healing and hope for religious equity in America. Dr. Nielsen.
Great. I'm so glad that you're all here. I can see 4 of us virtually, and I'm seeing I believe Eleanor and Samantha and Anna and Doris. And I want to take a moment to just name: are there others that I do not see so far in the space, or did I potentially misrepresent you or name or give you the or use the wrong pronunciation of your name? I just want to make sure that I'm seeing who's all in the room.
Do you want to introduce yourself? There's a guest.
John Myers.
John Myers.
Hi, John. Hi, John. And any of the rest of you that I've already named, I apologize if I mispronounce your name. Okay, so there will be 7 of us to engage in this conversation, and obviously I welcome others and hope others will join us. This is meant to be a highly interactive conversation, and it requires you. And I invite you, if you feel comfortable, to enter a space of conversation of this. I'm going to share my screen, but I'm going to be popping on and off my screen a little bit. If you ever have anything that you would like to interject, if you ever have any questions, you are free to just simply unmute yourself if you're comfortable with that, or drop into the chat window, which I will try to pay attention to, and I will ask for help on that if I don't see it. Don't hesitate until it's too long past to insert your voice on this. I want to be able to give that space. So we're going to do this as quickly but as fluidly as possible, because we have such a small amount of time to talk about what I believe is a really, really important topic. So you've come to this session called Engage Critical Pluralism, the Next Generation Beyond Interfaith. And I'm thankful for the introduction. Here's my sort of introductory slide so that you know there are another couple of identifiers that I want to bring into the space that I will intentionally talk about a little bit later. But alongside my professional roles, identify using he and him and his pronouns. I also identify as a white cis-identifying heterosexual male in this conversation, and so understanding that there are power dynamics in being a presenter of a conversation and trying to present dynamics of systemic and structural oppression and marginalization as a straight white cis-identifying heterosexual male in this. I also want to identify myself as a United Methodist ordained clergy, but that's a complicated factor about me. I am not practicing as an ordained clergy at the moment, and I am in many ways not expecting to return to that level, though I am and have benefited and have been a part of that system itself. Currently identify as agnostic. Those 4 factors, I think, are important as a part of this whole dynamic as we talk about this discussion. And because of that, I am a beneficiary of Christian normativity, hegemony, and white Christian privilege, which I will definitely be talking about in this space. So as we continue, I understand this morning that there was an intention to name the land that the Trifaith Initiative and Omaha and the surrounding areas are on. I want to take a moment to continue that by naming my own land acknowledgement. So I'm a beneficiary as a member and as a staff professional and partial faculty at Dickinson College, that the land on which I am financially able through the capitalistic system to benefit is on unceded lands of the Susquehannock Nation. And we help to acknowledge that the many indigenous people have lived on these lands, and the thousands of indigenous children that were forced into a reprogramming camp known as the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in 1879, which is in itself the first Indian industrial school in America. The college bears responsibility for the support and recognition it provides, and the federal effort to culturally assimilate and eradicate the indigenous peoples. And accordingly, this work is a living land acknowledgement and is deliberately unfinished work. I do not believe, nor do we believe, thankfully, that a few sentences on the page can help to eradicate and overcome longstanding issues of settler colonialism. There, as we move forward, I invite us to pause and think about our own experiences in this, our own benefiting, and for some of us, our own not benefiting, our own trauma that is in accordance with these experiences. Not trying to leave such a space, but to try to move forward in acknowledging and holding that at the same moment. A quick recap on the sort of session description. What did you come to? This virtual session seeks to invite participants to think about the next stage of the interfaith movement, one that should include intentional healing and hope for religious equity in America. Okay, so we have to think about what is the interfaith movement. And this is the beginning of my invitation for you all to participate. I'm going to invite you to either in the chat window or to unmute yourself to share a few words, phrases, descriptions that come to mind when I say the interfaith movement. What do you think of? What comes to mind immediately? And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see you as we do this, and ask and invite you again to speak up or to add something to the chat window. So the question is, what is the interfaith movement?
I'll start.
Please do.
John Myers. So I was one of the founding board members of Interfaith, and our synagogue has been involved in interfaith dialogues for many years. So it dates back to the 90s for me. But so for my experiences, when I first hear interfaith, I immediately jump to Trifaith because I've been living it.
Great. Great. I also hear that you said interfaith dialogue. So would you say that that is an identifier of of the interfaith movement for you, is dialogue?
Dialogue has always been, not always, sorry, but even back into the 60s and civil rights has been a kind of a,
yes,
kind of a pillar, or at the very least, it's been a movement within our congregation for many years from our rabbis, but led by our rabbis and not always followed by our entire congregation.
Got it. Thank you so much for that. And it's John, is that right? Okay, thank you. Samantha is adding to this conversation as well in the chat window. Collaboration between people from various faith traditions, and at times those who claim no faith tradition. We're adding that. So thank you for writing and adding to that chat window, those of us about John's response. Others, please don't hesitate.
I think of interfaith as people coming to the table and being there for one another when the other cannot be there, that you're still speaking up on behalf of your brothers and sisters of other faiths.
Got it. Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Oh, yes. And it's your truth. So even if it doesn't fully make sense to me, it's your truth. And so we're coming into this to learn together. So I'm hearing us showing up at the table, coming together at the table, and also showing up and coming when others can't be at the table to help support others.
Right. That's correct.
Okay. Eleanor is adding to this conversation as well. She says, or Eleanor, I'm trying to not gender you in this, but Eleanor says, I think of interfaith as people and organizations engaging across lines of difference, including religious, racial, ethnic, ethical, and a range of intersectional identities. Thank you for that. Anne is also adding to the conversation. Yes, to me, interfaith means acknowledgement and acceptance of diverse ideas. Thank you. This is good. Let's go a little deeper. I'm going to go back to sharing the presentation for where we are. So we're helping to define this. What is the interfaith movement for us? I want to give a few examples from a few websites that have used this to create descriptions. Interfaith groups organize members and leaders of difference. Sorry, I'm changing where I can see you all. Different religious traditions to address the community issues that affect them and to engage in social justice and service work. These groups have multiplied over the last decade, some remaining at the grassroots level to focus on local issues, while others have joined national alliances with shared interests. Okay, that's one description. Here's another description that has been offered by professional organizations. Interfaith action, sort of moving off of it slightly. When a group of people of different beliefs do something together, such as plant a garden for those in need of food, and interfaith-based outreach, like when people of diverse faiths educate about religious beliefs, so religious literacy, such as teaching others about religion. Okay, and one final one. Since 1893, a movement has grown up around the idea that religious people can find common ground through dialogue, and while they may not agree on who the mouthpiece of God is, or even what to call that supreme deity, they are beginning to learn that their shared values can be put to use for the betterment of the world. Okay, so this last one gives us a chance to look at a few pieces that I'm simply going to invite you to hold, okay? They may not be coming out immediately, but since 1893, a movement has grown up around the idea of religious people. One of you have already named non-religious identities as well, those that don't have a religious identity. Another piece is this sort of secondary piece. The mouthpiece of God is, or even what to call that supreme deity. That seems to be looking in a way as though there is a supreme deity that is tied to a religious identity. And that might be an interesting thing for us to explore as we go. So I want to keep us moving forward and try to give some specific definitions and actions and programs and activities that we see within the interfaith movement. Some of them that you've already named. Okay, what actions, programs, activities make up this interfaith movement? Lots of times, dialogues, discussions, coming to a table. For what purpose? Sometimes dialogues to discussions, to hear one another, to understand across difference. As well, service activities, as was described, planting a garden, perhaps doing a housing project, perhaps doing something in the community that tries to bring people together. All of these things that create a container on which those dialogues and those discussions around difference might be able to be assuaged and might, through the opportunity in that container, be able to be engaged. As well, activities which promote commonalities, looking for things that find what is it that we can agree upon. That seems to be one of the principal markers of the interfaith movement. And those things which cross religious communities. That's what we would often define it as interfaith. If it was within a Christian framework, we might define it as ecumenical by definition, sort of Protestant versus Lutheran. We could describe ecumenical, though, between Sunni and Shia Muslims as well. That would be, by definition, ecumenical, though that word has often been sort of appropriated as being from a Christian landscape. We might get to why that's playing out. The question is, which communities are given access to the interfaith movement? Perhaps that's the first question for us to think about. Let's look at sort of where does the term interfaith come from? Many of you might know that the term interfaith was coined at the 1893 Parliament of the World's Religions. It was it was in this context in Chicago, Illinois, when the Dalai Lama had brought together folks from across the world to finally engage in a cross-religious set of dialogues, an opportunity to celebrate those religious expressions in which the term interfaith came into being. And since that time, over the last nearly 130 years, it has been used in a variety of contexts. One of those contexts that I think is important to name is the naming of it and the sort of solidification, crystallization of it by entities, including the Roman Catholic Church, which to this day deems interfaith work within the largest denomination, within the largest religious community across the world, with more than 1 billion adherents. The Roman Catholic Church determines interfaith to be any action related between Jewish, Christian, and Muslim identities. Now that we hear, and if you're coming from if you are not within Jewish, Christian, or Muslim identities, you might immediately recognize that that is something that leaves you feeling away. That's the first step for us to be thinking critically about this work. The interfaith movement has also gained prominence in the 2000s in response to 9/11 and the outgrowth of religious diversity in the US, in America. And it is an interesting question for us to think about. And I invite you, in terms of as we frame this, what is the interfaith movement, to just pause for a moment, because what we're about to do is to take a hard pivot in a different direction to bring another thread together. The next thing that we're going to do is talk about our history, about what do we know about religion and religious influence in North America. So I'm going to invite you to come back into the discussion and help us with what you feel like you know about the history of religion and religious influence in North America. So again, I invite your voices in text format, in audio format, whatever feels comfortable, whatever feels within your ableness to share. What do we know about the history of religion in America?
It's been coercive.
It's been coercive. Can you say a little bit more, if you're willing?
Particular religions have been utilized to force other people to behave and engage in particular ways.
Would you be willing to take that further and name what particular religions you're thinking about?
I would say at the top is Christianity, and underneath that would be Abrahamic, and so on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. What else?
I'm Van Michael. I would like to offer into the discussion and support too that it has been very coercive here in the North Americas as far as how religion was introduced to this land was coercive. I look at the notion around it being a reformative way, like people came for religious freedoms, and that was not the case, but that is the facade. So religion here has, to me, been used as a cover for the bigger power dynamic that was at bay from a world view when we look at the Anglican Church and we look at, the Roman Empire and things of that part. So that's how I look at it.
Thank you. And can I get your name? I'm sorry. I have not been able to interact with you. I'm sorry. Hey.
Hi, I'm Van Michael Millhouse.
Van,
Yes.
It's nice to meet you. Thank you for adding that to the space.
Yes.
Others, I want to add Anne. Anna said Christianity has been viewed as the norm. There is often an assumption that if you are American, you are Christian. Okay, thank you for that. Anything else? What you feel like you know? What you like? And when I say what do you know, you can feel it. What do you feel about the history of religion in America? And I feel like, Van, you hit on that a little bit, but I want to, if there's anybody else that wants to add to that. Okay, we'll hold that. That's perfectly fine. I'm coming back, just trying to share information. We're sort of hitting on it. What do we know about religion and religious influence in America? We are caught up within religion, and especially within Christianity, in a history of empire, a history that goes back to what we call post-Constantinian Christianity, when when the Emperor Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, that has had its threads, that has continued onward until in this very moment, in this very space that we live in. A history that is constructive of race and has carried the vessels of racism. I'm currently in this big DEI retreat in which we have been talking about the social construction of race, and I have often inserted the social construction of race is largely due to the context of Western Protestant and Catholic empire and the creation of race and racism itself. The standardization and the use of settler colonialism in claiming land in the name of the king with the permission specifically of the Pope, especially through things like the doctrine of discovery. This is in so many ways our history of religion and religious influence in North America. I'm adding in here this sense also, because we won't get to it, to think about when colonizers came to America and landed in America. Who were they? Puritans, white Puritans who settled the land, white Anglicans who settled the land, who used power and promotion of their own idealistic norms to eradicate other identities, to subjugate other identities. This is our history, and it is built and baked into a racist modality that starts in the white Christian privilege and the white Christian supremacy culture. And this is where we come from. Now, how does this all fit? This is the sort of piece of this whole thing that we have to look at, the creation of Christian normativity in this space. I want to do a couple of definitions that I think are important for us that will help us to grasp at this. I've mentioned the term Christian privilege, about my own Christian privilege. The definition of Christian privilege is an invisible, unearned, and largely unacknowledged array of social benefits that are afforded to Christians in this country. It was named already, the assumption of the norm. The norm and everything else is the other. These invisible, unearned, and largely unacknowledged arrays of social benefits are afforded to Christians in American space and largely on global spaces, though there obviously are spaces outside of the sort of Western world in which Christianity is in a minority, which changes the dynamics, but we don't have time to talk because our context is here in America. Christian hegemony, the institutionalization of Christianity as a norm, including through language, beliefs, and practices. If I sneeze, you say, bless you. If I speak truth, you say, amen. Those are institutional structures, language, beliefs, practices that exist in the midst of this. Doris adds in visible physical space, visible physical space of various religious organizations appears to represent cooperation and collaboration, but where does this acceptance fit in? I'm adding this to the ongoing pieces of our conversation as we go. What is this other nomenclature, this other language that I've used? White Christian supremacy. The intertwined notions of the supremacies of the white race and the Christian religion. That might be a hard thing to hear. Behind everything, behind white supremacy, behind Christian supremacy, in my personal opinion, is a white Christian supremacy structure that is often unnamed. Lastly, one other piece to name, and I might be hearing someone trying to chime in. If there is, I'll pause here. Is there someone that wants to add in their voice? I heard Someone coming off the mute, perhaps, if you want to chime in, please do.
I did. I came off the
Yes,
mute.
please.
I
Yeah,
wanted to
please.
make the comment to what was in the chat, and I don't know that the white supremacist system that you're speaking to, Cody.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it's
please.
this system does not.
Sorry, I lost that. Can you say that one more time?
Okay,
This system what?
This system is not designed, to me, for so to encourage us. What I'm trying to say is that in order to survive in this system of Christian normativity, you have to cultivate within self that deeper sense of what you know, you were speaking to, Cody, that, and be able
Yeah.
to push against. And if someone says amen, you say ashe, I say ashe, stretch my own self to push those boundaries. That's what I suggest. That's what I try to do. That's what I was trying to say.
That's great. That's excellent. Thank you, Van, for adding your voice to this as we keep going here. I want to add one last piece. And I know we're going to run out of time. I hate this. We're going to run out of time, but I'm going to keep us going and try to shift us into this other space. I want to name something that my colleague Jenny Small named in a new critical theory that she has. It's called false neutral secularism, or the false neutral of secularism. Throughout our society, very much in a post 9/11 format, as we've seen the rise of the non-religious community, or the nuns, as Pew Research has told us, we have seen an engaged sense that people are describing the world as becoming more and more secular, which one, I believe, is truly false when we look at the demographic data in depth and we take away our sort of Christian normativity lens, but also secondarily, the rise of secularization is actually a false neutrality. It's an understanding that modern secularism is in fact not equality or equity for all religious and non-religious identities, but a false promise which has elevated white Christians above all others. And again, I invite you to hold that as you think about it and process this. One more slide here as we sort of drift and get ready to come back into the sort of larger critically engaged or engaged critical pluralism space. What are the expressions in society of Christian normativity? First and foremost is the use of the Gregorian calendar, the framing of our way. When you say to someone who is of a non-Christian identity, wow, Ramadan moves 12 to 14 days every year. The truth of the matter is that Ramadan never moves. The truth of the matter is that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Diwali and Holi, they never move. What moves is our enforcement of the use of the Gregorian calendar. Ramadan is at the same time every year for our Muslim colleagues. But we experience it moving because we use a Gregorian calendar and we create a standard norm and frame that Christianity's use of the Gregorian calendar is our structure. We think of quote unquote American food without the necessary thoughts around dietary features that are inclusive and equitable. We think about having a hamburger. We think about July 4th. We think about what is Americana. And at the whole time, we sometimes miss the sacredness. And I will use that term from my Christian normativity, the sacredness. Once in a classroom experience I had, as I was asking people to define how they saw such a difference in different varying religious and spiritual and philosophical communities. And one person said, the definition of what is food. And that was compelling and deeply troubling to me as not recognizing that, to recognize what is and is not considered food. Another piece of expressions of societal's Christian normativity, and here's where I'm going to actually give us a chance to see it in practice. I want to click on this link and I hope that it will come up. I don't know if I've shared only the PowerPoint. When I click on this, I'm going to ask you, do you see my screen move to the Pew Research Institute, or do you see it stay only in the PowerPoint? Which one did you see there?
PowerPoint.
Has it
PowerPoint.
just the PowerPoint? Okay, hang on a second. We're going to try to do this again. I'm going to share the screen. Okay, this is the website for the Pew Research Center's Religious Landscape Survey. Okay, put on your critical lens. What do you see in this demographic breakdown? Immediately. Shout it out.
Can't see it.
Can't say it, but I think it's Christian at the top.
Oh, can you still not see it here?
It's not big enough.
Hang on,
So,
hang on. Let's see if I can do it. How's that?
Good.
You can see it now. Okay, so what do you see?
The breakdown of Christianity is lots of options.
Mhm.
Okay. Lots of options. Okay. I can click on mainline Protestant and I get all of these. Okay. So we don't see the breakdown of other traditions. We also see that all of the Christian identities are on the left, which is where our eye goes, and the non-Christian faiths go to the right. And we could go all day and talk about the term faith. Hinduism is not by definition a religion, because it is not. It does. There is a lot of not. We could talk about how Sikh identity is not on here. We could talk about the term, what is other world religions versus other faiths, and what does that mean? But we can also talk about how evangelical Protestant and mainline Protestant are separated from historically Black Protestant. Even if there is a truthfulness in there, there is a reason that there is such a historically Black Protestant community. And we know that. So all of those things are part of this journey as we go. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm seeing a couple of expressions over here in the chat. I can see it, division between Christian and non-Christian. That's Anne. Lisa says, I'm processing this and I agree with you. As a Jew, I even feel more minimalized lately in this country, especially with the Supreme Court's definition of when life begins. Not trying to get political, but I can't hold it. That's okay. This is the space. That's good for you to share that, or at least it's you're welcome to share it in this space with me. I'm going back to sharing my PowerPoint. Okay, here we go. The last thing, the implied social norm versus the other, the expectation of what is, the expectation of what you do. Where are you on Sunday morning? The idea that your religious, philosophical, spiritual community engages in some sort of, at a location, worship. That in itself is an implied social norm that is tied to Abrahamic structure. The knowledge and awareness that Juma is on Friday afternoon, that Shabbat begins at sundown on Friday and ends at sundown on Saturday, the understanding that Sunday morning is the time when most Christians gather. All of that is part of the implied social norm, as Audre Lorde would talk about, the knowledge and the awareness. And if I tell you who is at Juma, you have an implied experience, likely a brown skin, identifying male, female. You're understanding that in that social norm of who's there and what's there. What's the interfaith movement got to do with all of this? That's the question. We have dialogues and discussions, service projects and activities which promote commonalities, those things which cross religious communities. Which religious communities? Often Abrahamic religion communities. What's the interfaith movement got to do with this white Christian normativity and supremacy? Most of those dialogues and discussions are focused on Christian understanding and on the expectation of normativity. How many times have we engaged in a discussion in which we're like, tell me about what you believe in heaven and hell. Tell me what you believe about an afterlife. Now ask ourselves, how does that benefit us to learn from those who don't have a concept of a heaven and hell? What about a reincarnation experience? What happens when someone says, it's okay, we all believe in the same God? What happens when we realize that that is not true at all? Not only do we not believe in the same God, but that some of the traditions and communities that we are engaging don't have a deity. What happens in the interfaith movement when our focus is on commonalities and lowest common denominators of connection? We lose the nuance. We lose the experience that truly gives us the difference of expression, and we lose the struggle. And that is a little bit, again, Audre Lorde. If I'm not in the struggle, I don't know you. If you don't have the ability to engage in the deep division that exists, you might never get there. Was there somebody who wanted to add their voice there? I thought I heard someone coming in. Okay, I'm going to keep going for time, but I want to name that if you want to come in, you're welcome at any time. And the biggest thing that the interfaith movement in my personal narrative really sits on is that we're failing to address systemic and structural marginalization that exists. We're saying that the interfaith movement is there to stand up for one another. But how far are we willing to go? How far have we gone? And not just how far am I willing to go as an individual, but how far has the movement gone toward the civil rights imperative, toward the naming of the normativity, toward reaching that in the United States alone, that First and 14th Amendment protections truly exist for each and all religious and non-religious identities that are there. So what is critically engaged pluralism, and why do I believe in many ways that the interfaith movement needs another insertion, or perhaps even a deconstruction to reconstruct in this time? Critically engaged pluralism engage critical pluralism as I am in the midst of drawing it out, ask the fundamental question of moving ourselves in our work beyond and past commonalities. It calls us to focus on critical issues of discrimination and civil rights-based pieces. I work in higher education. How many times in the places that you exist have you seen, experienced yourself from your employer, from your institution of higher learning, that if you are not Christian, you are required to take off vacation days to be able to be given a time to practice, to participate in those communities that you are a part of? How many times do we imagine that college students are forced to choose between academic experiences and success and their own right? How many times do we see an expectation that our kosher, halal, vegan, lacto-vegetarian folks simply have to make do with what is there? That is a civil rights issue, and it is inherently built into the normativity that we have not gotten to. How many conversations in our interfaith movement have truly named those things? Engage critical pluralism asks us to go and take action that involves overcoming these systemic and structural marginalization issues. And even further, it asks us to address and name the intersectional dynamics in play. The queer community in America has been largely able to build up a sort of post-religious whiteness. But being Black and queer is challenging. Being Black and religious and queer is very different than being Black and being white and religious and queer. Those dynamics are all in play. Being that we have named, and I hope we can continue to name, that race is a social construction that was created by Protestant and Catholic empire. We also created the gender dynamics. We created the patriarchy through this. We created queerness. We created the otherness and the marginalization through this. And the question is, did we create the interfaith movement in white Christian savior mode to protect us? Have we addressed the intersectional places? And are we willing in the next generation to decenter Christian voices, especially white Christian voices, to actually get to the core of the pain and the trauma, and to ask ourselves deeply whether interfaith is doing the real work or placating that which is still ahead of us? This is a lot. And it's going to require us to think about policy work that is not done, policies in our organizations, policies in our institutions, policies at our government level. One thing I like to say to folks is often that my experience of discrimination in higher education around and for those individuals who come from non-Christian and especially non-white Christian identities is so deep at this point that I believe that there is a missing Title IX-like piece of federal legislation that is necessary. In 2019, I benefited from being able to participate in the creation of the first statewide bill ever passed in US history mandating the addition of religious protection clauses on syllabi in the state of Washington. Every single syllabi, public, private, every institution of higher learning in the state of Washington requires a religious accommodations policy that is named and provided on every syllabi for students. It is very similar to American with Disabilities Act's statements. It is the first time that students were given that and told, you have a right to not be forced to be in this classroom, to not be held to consequential testing procedures, and there can be no consequences from that, to have your own religious and philosophical experiences. And when it was so hard to name that, it was passed bipartisanly. It's been passed in Utah by every single voting member of both the House and the Senate. We just passed a bill in Ohio with a 78-0 vote in the House, and it is moving to the Senate. It is a nonpartisan issue. Religious freedom is an unnamed and unaccounted for part of the interfaith movement. It's going to take us doing practice. It's going to take us being able to get into the muck of this and realizing when certain norms within Christianity or even within Abrahamic structure have allowed us to create the container that actually prevents other people's voices from being centered and other people's philosophies, practices, abilities to claim their space from being able to be centered and instead sort of continuously othered. As long as we're part of this, as long as we believe in God, as long as we find these common notions, that practice is going to change us. And that's where I see engaged critical pluralism benefiting us. I know we're going to run out of time. Future of pluralism beyond interfaith, in my mind, is not that far off. It's fundamentally a question of, are we willing to step into an anti-racist, decolonizing space in which we name that white Christian privilege, normativity, and even to an extent, Abrahamic normativity and privilege has benefited and been a part of the interfaith movement from the beginning? And can we take the next step? So I'd love to get some Q&A. I'm going to stop here. I know we're going to run out of time. I know you might have to move on to other things, but I'm happy to stay here for a few minutes and come into this space even more with you. I know you may be experiencing a lot of this. I also am going to leave you with my contact information. I'd love to be able to keep engaging with you on this conversation, but I'm totally going to stop. As a white cis man, I've taken a lot of space in my voice. I want to hear what you're thinking and get some feedback. So Doris is asking a question: how do policies benefit white supremacists under the banner of Christian privileges, Christian practices?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think
Often,
yeah,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to offer, that's a great question. I think, because I look at religious freedom and I think about Mike Pence, and I think about his alignment with Trump, yet his disalignment. And it appears to be a disalignment. However, that is a way that from a political standpoint, that the Christian dominance can stay in control politically and hide under the guidance of religious freedom. That's why this pluralism that you're speaking to and making sure that this policy is in place is important. So that's how I see that. Would you say?
Yeah, I would say that's true. I also would say that there's interesting things from the political sphere that white evangelicals have sold their soul on the single issue vote and are giving into the single issue without upholding what are supposedly principles. But the one principle stands above all other. And that one principle is the pro-life stance. And we're seeing it. I mean, we're in June 2022. We are going to see a Supreme Court ruling. And wherever you stand on the pro-life stance, the question is one issue worth the entire House?
Cody, if I may, I want to go back to
Yes.
my question, because you talked about the policies
Yes.
that you were helping to, you're advocating for, and in fact have implemented. Some of the states
Yes.
have implemented. That's why my question was raised about white supremacists,
Yes.
and their role in what they view as their practices. And are you suggesting that they too have equal rights for the policies, similar policies?
I think that's the interesting challenge of First Amendment protections. We often get nervous when somebody comes and says, so obviously we think about, okay, so I'll name Good Friday. So Good Friday, of course, being for some Christians being an important religious day on the calendar in which they're asked to get off. Now, almost no religious holidays are ever something that somebody asks for off as a Christian because it's already off, but Good Friday is sometimes off. I think it makes people really squirrely. Sometimes they'll even get to the point of like, well, yeah, we'll give off for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but we don't like the comfortability of giving people off like Good Friday. That's real. That's what First Amendment, that's what the balancing act and understanding that the First Amendment doesn't say separation of church and state, but that Congress, that Congress shall oh gosh, now I'm failing to get the words, and I know these 16 words by heart.
Established.
But the establish or prevent the free exercise thereof. That's the balancing act. So when you give religious freedom, you have to give it equitably. And what has failed to be accomplished is that we have failed to give equitably to non-white Christian spaces. I can't tell you every different Christian identity, but I can tell you that I have learned much from my Black colleagues, from my Arab Christian colleagues, from my African colleagues, that not every Christian religious practice that might be observant is known to me as a white Protestant Christian that comes from the Midwest. I may learn something, and if I go, is that really that important? That's my white Christian supremacy. Whether I say it out loud or whether I put it under my internal guise, any objectivity that says one is more important than the other creates the supremacist structure. And I think that's actually where the policies have benefited.
Well,
We're 5 minutes past. How
Wait.
about one or two more questions?
Well, let's make very clear about when I say white supremacists, you understand who I'm talking about as KKK folks who are using religion. And if your policies that you're promoting, would that give them protection as well, or acknowledge their views?
It does not. So I would not say that I would want to go that far. I will say I'm not willing to go that far. I have very high uncomfortability, and I think there's a more freedom of speech issue in play in certain ways versus a freedom of religion. The KKK, that's one of the things that we often don't talk about, and I think you're hitting on it and making and complexifying the situation. I am not here to support the KKK as a religious movement. Van, are you leaving, or are you?
no, I'm trying to get in. I want to jump into
Sorry,
this.
get in here. Get into this, please.
One of the things, you're bringing up a great point, and I wanted to say that ideologies like the KKK are already protected here. That's why we have lynchings, we have dragons, we have Auburn's, we have Barnes, we have Sanders already. It shows up in our legal systems. It shows up. That's why I call it the tentacles. It's a disease and it spreads. It supports these little systems. It's already being supported. It's already being supported here. That's the reason why, Black folk here, we are here in Americas, on the North American. That is why, because it's so embedded. We can't even see that it's already built into the policies that this man has to say. I have to even remind myself that I'm othering when I say, well, is that even a problem? It's so deep. It's a disease.
Okay.
I agree. And Van has said it cleaner than I can say it, and I appreciate that very much. You're helping me out. You're throwing me a line. Other questions? Otherwise, I know you guys have to move on to other things. I've left my contact information in the comment section, including my phone number, which is highly available. If I was with you in person, I would love to engage in some coffee or maybe an alcoholic beverage for some of you that are able and interested in that. But I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversation with you all.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you. I'm trying to get your information. Don't shut the group down, y'all. I'm a little slower.
Not until anybody says they're good.
Oh, I can put it in there again. It's in the chat window. I'll also just throw up the slide real quick so you can see it. Let's do that. You can throw up the slide so you can take a look. And if you are gonna connect with me, that first email address, convergencestrategies.org. It's a little challenging on that. And also for some of you, I will just name what happens with my name. Some of you have experienced much worse butchering of your name. My last name, Nielsen, it does get lost. I've had people before say, I can't get a hold of you. And I'm like, it's probably because my last name got spelled incorrectly or got auto-corrected. So.
Strategies.
Yes, strategies. Convergence strategies. Yes.
You guys get the number.
All right.
Excellent.
Yes.
Everybody-
Thank you very much. So,
All right, thanks everyone.
all right, I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation, okay?
Absolutely.
All right, take care.